After you add a hatch pattern or else a hatch type, you can proceed and do some settings. You have looked at this particular setting. You can modify any of these particular pattern to the pattern that you want. And also something else that we should note is that you can proceed and set the origin. Now, let's say for example, I have this kind of a pattern and I want the first row of this particular pattern to start as a full row, such that I want it to start like this. It should be full. Of course, I want it to start from the bottom. So in this case, that's why you can proceed and use the set origin. I can click on it and then click at this particular point. So I want it to be the origin. And now you can note that the pattern is going to start off with a full block of this particular pattern. Of course, you can do the same to this side. You may want to set it as the origin. You can click at this point and then proceed to this part or proceed to this point and click, and it is going to start off with a full block. So that is the use of the set origin. Again, the set origin can also be useful. Let's say for example, I proceed and add a hatch pattern to this kind of a region. So I'll proceed and then I add this kind of a pattern. It is going to be like that. You can also set the origin such that the origin is actually this side. So if I click, you can note that that is how the origin is going to be. I can also set this part to be the origin. I can click on set origin and then I can click on this part. So it is going to be like that. So it is actually creating something like a perfect alignment with the point where you choose. We also have something that we call transparency when we deal with the hatches, and of course it works with any of this type. So we can look at this example of a solid fill. I can select it. So let me select the pattern. So there we have the pattern, and then we have the hatch transparency. And normally the hatch transparency can be dictated by the layer if you want, or else by block. In this case, we are going to dictate it from this point by inputting the value. So let's say for example I want 50 as the transparency, and once I have 50, you can note that we're in a position to see even the details behind this particular solid fill. So you can proceed and use this particular transparency. It could be useful sometimes, and remember it is going to proceed up to 90. So there we have the pattern, and it's a solid pattern, but still, because it is transparent, or else because we have increased the transparency, we can even be in a position to view this particular polyline that is behind this particular fill. Again, with this one, as much as it is actually a pattern, you can select it and then you change the fill transparency to about 60, and you can note that once I click, the lines are actually fading away, the color is fading away, meaning that it is becoming more transparent. Let's have 0. Again, you can change the angle if you wish. For example, I have this kind of a pattern. I can proceed and select it like that, and then I change the angle from this point. So currently it is 0. I may want to be about 30. So for alignment, so you can make sure that the pattern is aligning properly. But of course, in this case, we are doing it for purposes of illustration. So here we can have that. You can change the angle from this point. You can have 45, or else you can have any angle that you want, or that actually is suitable for a certain alignment. So let's proceed and have 0 as the angle. Yeah, so that is also something that we should note. Now, when you are working with these particular hatches, I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to delete this hatch, and then I'm going to add another hatch. So proceed back and then click on the hatch. Now, when you are working with this particular hatch, we have the option of making the hatch associative, and also we have the option of making the hatch annotative, such that it responds to the annotative scale. So there we have the option of setting up the annotative scale. So let's start with the associativeness. Now, let me start with non-associativeness. So I'll proceed and make sure that this one is actually not active, and then I'm going to proceed and add this kind of a pattern. Now with this pattern, I may want to extend the boundary. Remember the boundary in this case, it was the polyline. I can select it and then extend it like this. So you can note that after I extend, it is leaving behind the hatch up to the point where it was originally. So that will be the case if you have it, or if you have associative unchecked, or else if you have associative inactive. But of course, after I click at associative, if I click at this point and then I proceed and add this particular hatch pattern, and then I hit on the green tick, if I proceed and change the position of the polyline later like this, you can note that it is moving with the pattern. So there is that particular constraint. So that is the case when you use the associative option. Again, let me proceed and delete this one, and then click at the hatch. That is the tool, or that is the object. Now you may want a pattern to be annotative, such that it is going to respond to the annotative scale. Now remember that annotative scale is only going to affect the annotative objects. Now this annotative object could include the line work, the hatches as we have seen them, the dimensions, the text, the blocks. So those kind of categories of objects, they are called annotative objects. Remember, we still have the non-annotative object. They are normally 3D objects that are used in modeling, so they do not respond to the annotative scale. But of course, the tags, the text, the hatches, and just to name a few, they actually respond to the annotative scale, especially when they are set to respond to this particular scale. So that of course will be the case with this particular hatch. You can proceed and decide to have it respond to the annotative scale. So I may proceed and delete it, and then proceed back to the hatch, and then I make sure that the annotative scale is actually checked, and now you can proceed and add the pattern. Now you can see that even after I add the pattern, because the annotative scale matters, you can note that no pattern is going to be displayed because the scale is now very huge. But of course, if I proceed at this point and probably I reduce the scale to probably 1:10, we can be in a position to view some we can be in a position to view some patterns. But of course, we need to proceed and change the scale or adjust the scale to be in a position to view the pattern. So in this case, we can proceed and have 1:1. So you may want your hatch to be responsive to the annotative scale, and in that case you need to use the option of having it annotative. So I made it. Now let's proceed and add the hatch, and then we make sure that annotative is unchecked and also associative, and now I can click to add it. So even if I proceed at this point and change the annotative scale, you can note that the hatch pattern is not going to respond to the change. So you may want to have your hatch pattern responding to the annotative scale, or else you may want to have it non-responsive to that particular option. So that is it. Now, if you set up your hatch pattern to be associative, and also you set it to be annotative, and then you proceed and add the pattern. In this case, we can have 1:1, so that we can be in a position to view the pattern. Later, you can select it, and then you can decide to check whether the annotative scale or the annotative response need to proceed, or else you need to terminate that particular feature. So in this case, you can proceed and click, and it is going to be terminated from that point. But of course, after you add the pattern without setting up this point or without activating these particular options, after you select it, you might not be in a position to activate it, but sometimes it may give you that particular ability. But most of the time, you may find that here the associative and also annotative, sometimes they are grayed out after you select it. yeah, after you select it, and in this case you will have added the hatch. So that is also something that we should note. Now we should also note that you can match properties. For example, we can look at an example here. I have this pattern and also this pattern. I'm going to change this pattern to another pattern. For example, I may change it to probably that pattern just for illustration. Now I may want to proceed and change the pattern, this pattern, to be similar to this pattern. So what I want to do, or what you may need to do, is to proceed and change. You proceed and select the pattern that is not changing at all, and then click on match properties, and then you need to proceed and click the pattern that is going to be modified or that is going to change. So in this case it is this pattern. I can click, and okay, I think that it is the other way around. So you need to proceed and select the pattern that is going to change. We can look at that once again. You need to select the pattern that is going to change. For example, this one, I may want it to change from this pattern to this pattern, so I select it first, and then you click at match properties, and then you click the properties that are going to be inherited. So it is this property. I can proceed and click, and okay, it is not changing, so let me try again. So I'm going to select this pattern, and then I click at match properties, and then I can try to change this one. Okay, I don't know why it is not responding, so let me try again with this pattern, or you can try again with another pattern. So we can have that kind of a pattern. I'm going to try once again. Select this pattern, click on match properties, then we can match it to this one. Again, that is what we are seeing. We have said that the properties have been transferred, as we can see. So let me undo and try again. So I'm going to select this pattern, and then you can now proceed and click at this particular option, and you can click at this one. So you can see actually it is matching. So there is that option of matching properties, and in this case you can decide to match even with the settings of the origin. So you can decide to use the current origin, or else you can decide to use the hatch origin. Now before even we proceed, there is something else that we should note. When you are working with these particular patterns, we have the option of setting up patterns. You can decide to use the settings that we have here from this particular contextual menu. You can proceed and set it up from this point, or else you can proceed and use the settings from this point. Yeah, so you can proceed and set up the pattern from this point. So the first thing that you do is to choose the pattern. Remember, in this case we are dealing with pattern only as the hatch type. We are not dealing with the solids and also the gradients. We are dealing with the pattern. So in this case you choose a predefined pattern, and then remember the predefined patterns are actually these patterns that we came across here. So these are the predefined pattern, and we use this button to expand. So you can proceed and work on a predefined pattern. You need to proceed and choose the pattern. So you can click at this point, and then you choose the pattern, and you can now proceed and work on it. So you can choose the color, as you have seen, like that. And also you can change the angle. Remember, we came across that the angle is this one. You can also proceed and change the scale. So you can change the scale from this point, or else using the settings. And also there you can set up the origin. So that is a predefined type. You can also have a user defined. So a user defined type of a pattern, and in this case you need to click at this particular swatch like that, and then you can choose from a number of patterns that we have here. So they could be more than what we have in the predefined patterns. So we could have more patterns from this point. So you choose one of them, and then you can proceed and change the angle and change the scale. So normally the user defined the custom, sometimes they are actually very related. So you need to proceed to the swatch here from this point. Click and choose the kind of pattern. We have a preview here. You can click to view that kind of a pattern like that. For example, you may want to have these cast in place panels. So this is the panel. We click OK, and you can change the angle, you can change the scale from this point, or else you can proceed and click OK, and it is going to be added to this point. So there it is, and you can proceed and add it up to that point. And if you want to change the scale, you can still change the scale from this point, or else you can use the settings. So click the settings and you can change the scale from this point. So those are the options that we have when you are working with these particular hatches. We should also note that when you are working with hatches, you may want to have the boundary retained, or else you can select the boundary and then you delete it, and the hatch is going to be retained like that. Something else that we should note about these hatches is the application of the hatch. Now, you should note that the 3D objects that you can see from this point do have a point where you can set up individual hatch. So, and then the hatch are going to be embedded in the settings, and then they can be set to display or not to display. So most of these objects, for example, the wall, the slabs, the roof, they do have the option of setting up the hatch in the styles, and that is it. But of course, you may want to use the hatch in detailing, and of course that is also something that you should note. You may set up we may use this particular hatch in detailing. For example, you have a wood and you want to detail it, you can proceed and use this kind of a wood. You can proceed and choose a wood pattern. So let's try to see whether we can find a pattern that represent a wood. So yeah, we have a wood, an example of a wood here, wood 2. And now after you choose it, you can proceed and have it like that. Now I'm going to change the scale. I'm going to select it, and then we can change the scale so that we can view it properly. So we can have a scale of about 300, or else you can have a scale of about 1000. So in that case, we are going to view this particular hatch, or we are going to use that particular hatch as a detailing hatch. So that is it. Again, you can decide to remove the boundary if you wish, and we are going to have something like that. So that is also something that we should note, that the hatch, this particular hatch tool that we have seen here, can be used when detailing. You can use the hatch pattern to do the detailing, and also you can use it in any other purpose that you want. Again, we have said that these particular 3D objects, they do have the option of setting up the hatch properties, but of course we don't use this tool. We use the embedded hatching feature in the styles. When you are setting up the style, that's when you proceed and set up the hatch pattern. But of course they use the similar hatch patterns that we are seeing from this point.